Thanks so much. So let's get properly started. Welcome to tonight's Skillshare. If you've not joined us before, the purpose of these sessions is to share the wisdom and experience from across the transition movement and beyond, because groups that are working for social change are often wrestling with the same issues and coming up with great solutions which can inspire and help elsewhere. This Skillshare is brought to you by Transition Together, an organisation set up to support community-led change in England, Wales and Northern Ireland by connecting, amplifying and offering practical support to a growing network of transition groups across the country. So tonight we're here to explore how we can invite and excite more people to get involved in our groups, our work, and in our shared purpose of shaping the vision of a thriving, resilient, fair community that works better for everyone. We know that people are the lifeblood of our groups. Without their time, skill, life experience and perspectives, we can achieve nothing. At the same time, for our transition activity and groups to really thrive, they need to involve and be connected to the views, needs and daily realities of a wide range of people in our communities. We can't do community-led change without the community. But it can be really hard. People are busy. We are often stressed with work and caring responsibilities. Many people are focused on the day-to-day issues of getting through everything life throws at them. And we know that the pandemic has led to a fall in volunteering. So it can feel like a really big challenge to get more people involved. But we have 4 brilliant speakers tonight ready to share their experience and the different ways their groups have discovered to go about this. After we've heard from each of them, we'll have some time for discussion and questions. So please store those up or pop them in the chat as we go. So first up, it's Pippa Jones from Transition Wilmslow. Pippa has been very involved with Transition Wilmslow since it was formed in 2009. And she says her involvement over the past 14 years has been fun, inspirational, and provided me with great friends and plenty of outdoor exercise. Perhaps this is even more the case since she retired from the NHS in 2017. Transition Wilmslow started by planting a community orchard in a local park. The next year they built raised beds, which became their first community garden, before branching out into energy, planning, transport, a tiny forest, peat bog restoration, and this year they became a registered charity. Even though Wilmslow is a well-established group, well known in the community due to their high-profile events, the group still worries they don't have enough reach or volunteers. And it can sometimes feel like it's the same people who do the bulk of the work. So we're looking forward to hearing more from Pippa about your experience of involving more people in Wilmslow.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I do feel that we probably all have many of the same problems. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion afterwards and the other talks. Can I have my slides? So I'm going to talk about how we've used events, doing things to grow our membership. And I'll talk more about each of these in a bit more detail. But just to go through, we've got a number of community gardens. We've done a lot of tree planting over the years. We've organised lots of walks. Repair cafes are probably one of our favourite activities. We ran a festival of nature in 2021 and 2022, and this next year we're having a festival to celebrate the 40th anniversary of finding Lindo Man on our peat bog. We've had Transition Wilmslow lectures, workshops and plant hunts. Okay, so the picture on the left is our first community garden, which was planted in a little park. We started off with an orchard and then we built raised beds, and each year we get groups of brownies or cubs or a class from a school to adopt each bed, and we help them with planting, and then we get them to harvest what they've planted at the end of the summer. And the picture on the right is an apple pressing event, which is one of the things that we do in the park, and just invite local people to come along. The kids love pressing the apples, and the parents bring a picnic. Okay, we got a forest garden. That's our other community, one of our other community gardens. which is where you're growing food using ecological principles of natural woodland. So you're having various layers of tree canopy and then ground cover and growing fruit in amongst those. And that's been a really fun thing. And the picture on the left is a group of scouts putting 450 whips in to make a nice hedge. And the picture on the right is a community day when people came along and planted trees. And this is our big community market garden. And we have to thank the Transition Network for one of those lovely polytunnels. The other came from somewhere else. And this community garden is actually in the grounds of a youth centre in a very large housing estate on the north side of the town, which has a lot of refugees. We've got Hong Kong families, Afghan families, Iranian families living there. And it's an area of huge food bank use. So it's been lovely to have the polytunnels and all the area around it. We supply salad crops to the community cafe in the children's centre. And we give a lot of excess produce to the food bank. This summer, again, thanks to the Transition Network, we got money for something called From Plot to Plate, which is where we employed a chef, a real chef, and families came along in the summer holidays. They went out and picked what they could find in the gardens and then came back and the cook helped them prepare the food and then cook the food. And the idea was that the families would take the food home, but actually they were having such a lovely time. They all sat down and had lunch together, which was very nice. The picture on the right is a grown-up version of that, which is our annual harvest dinner in the community garden where we eat our produce, which is very nice. And we get lots of people coming along to that who had never heard of Transition Wilmslow before, but it's just a lovely event. We organise lots of walks. We have walks for grown-ups. We have walks for little people. These are rainbows, I think, that we took on the peat bog. People love guided walks, especially guided walks taken by a real expert. And we have an expert in trees, and we have an expert in peat bogs, and we have an expert in ecology and wildflowers, and they are so popular, and you can get 30 or 40 people signing up for a walk, which is wonderful. We've done lots of community tree planting. That was on the right. That picture is the rugby club decided they wanted some trees. They asked Transition Wilmslow to come along, there's a group called the 1975 who are quite famous, who come from Wilmslow, went to Wilmslow High School, and we managed to persuade them to part with £25,000 of their hard-earned money to be donated to Earthwatch, which is a charity. And as a result, Earthwatch came along and helped us plant about 800 trees as a tiny forest on the high school site. And then Earthwatch will work with the school to do some citizen science projects around the forest. But that was very fun. And I think we had about 80 volunteers turn up for that. Okay, I think if I was starting out now, I'd start with a repair cafe. Everybody loves a repair cafe. You can't not love a repair cafe. This last time, I think we had about 90 repairs that were brought in with about 70 people. You only have to put a sign outside a church hall saying free coffee and homemade cake, and everybody's in. It's fantastic. We have electrics repairers, furniture repairers, a lady who specialises in teddy bear repairers, who's become quite famous, people who will do sewing and knitting and fix all sorts. And there's an academic at Surrey University who works on repair and reuse, and he's come up with an equation you can use where you multiply the weight of the item by a coefficient, and somehow you calculate the amount of CO2 you've saved by not putting the stuff in landfill. So that's something that everybody really enjoys. I think about 70% of our repairs actually get repaired, and people seem very happy with the service we offer. In 2021, we thought we'd have a Festival of Nature to remind everybody that COP26 was happening. We did this again in 2022. They were month-long festivals with talks and walks and activities. But at the end of September, we achieved one of my bucket list ambitions, which was to close the whole of the centre of Wilmslow. This is the A34, I would like you to know. And you can see 3 of our local councillors busy cycling. It's a pedal-powered concert, so all the audio is pedal-powered, and that is so much fun, honestly. The most hilarious thing is when people all stop pedaling at once and the music stops and they can't work out why. So we had circus performers, we had bikes, we had children on scooters in the middle of the road. It was just fabulous. And again, hundreds of people came to that. Lindo Mann is one of Wilmslow's most famous people. And 40 years ago, 1984, he was discovered in this beautiful peat bog. We've done a huge amount of work over the last decade, really, with scientific workshops, lectures, walks, bio-blitzes, all kinds of things to raise awareness of the importance of peat. It's owned by a private peat contractor who at last has stopped digging the peat, and the restoration has begun, and already you can see the water coming back and the sphagnum moss coming back. But we're going to have a cracker of a festival, including artwork, music, all sorts of things, to celebrate peat bogs and to try and get the message about peat bogs and the importance of peat out to people. So those are the sorts of activities we've been involved with. One of the big things we've also done is to try to engage with as many people as we possibly can. So actually going out to see people in different groups, tell them what we're doing, and providing them with what they want. I think that's the most important thing. The Cubs and Brownies are desperate for somewhere to take the children on summer evenings and do something, and growing food is a good idea. And then they go home and they tell their parents it's easy to grow potatoes. Working with town and county councillors has been helpful. And in fact, we've now got 3 members of Transition Wilmslow on the local town council. We've been involved in responding to all kinds of plans, trying to make them a bit greener, and obviously working with local groups like the food banks and refugee groups and the youth centre. And we've had quite a few volunteers who've come from the social prescribing at the GP cluster. And we also have a thing called the Cheshire East Climate Alliance, which is where all the transition-ish groups in Cheshire East meet on Zoom every 2 months, and they invite local councillors to join them. So really trying to reach out to as many people as we possibly can in as many different ways. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Pippa. Wow, what a lot you have going on. And I think we're all looking forward to an invitation to the Lindo Mann Festival in 2024.
Oh, yes.
Wonderful. Thanks, Pippa. Our next speaker is Katie from Transition Bath. So using a Transition Together seed funding grant plus some of their own funds, Transition Bath took Katie on as a paid role in May 2023 as a part-time coordinator, with a specific focus on recruiting more trustees and volunteers to the organisation. Since May, that's May this year, Katie has grown the volunteer team to 35, double what it was a year ago, and put various measures in place to recruit and retain volunteers, as well as organising several events and growing their mailing list. Katie, we are looking forward to hearing how you've done it.
So, like Chris said, since May, volunteer numbers have more than doubled. We now have 36 volunteers, and we did a magic 3-pronged approach in order to do this, which was do stuff, recruit, and then do more stuff. So it's not really that magic, but I'm just going to run through what we did. So first of all, we created a lot of events, just like Transition Wilmslow. We were trying to get more people aware of Transition Bath and what we're about, reaching out to the local communities, doing activities each month. As you can see, throughout August to December, we've been doing several activities each month on different topics to interest different types of people. The biggest event we did was a sustainability shorts series of very short 10-minute lectures on eco matters, which attracted 70 people to it. And most recently, in the picture at the bottom there, was a food preservation workshop that we did earlier this year, focusing on Christmas preservation, bottled lemons and clementines, that sort of thing. While we were doing all of this stuff to generate interest in Transition Bath after the hiatus that had happened after the COVID restrictions, we were recruiting at the same time. And the way that we did this, it was we advertised really widely, very specific roles. And we used a variety of recruitment platforms to do this. I just wanted to talk you through some of those in case they might be of use to you. So Reach Volunteering is a very good skills-based platform. It's nationwide. So if you've got a role that you're advertising that requires a specific set of skills, Reach Volunteering is really good for that. We managed to recruit 2 really excellent volunteers from Reach Volunteering. We also approached the Bath University Student Union. They have a volunteering website. And we had 9 students responding to our adverts for all different roles that we were advertising. Of those 9 that applied, we only managed to interview about 3, and we're using those. They're very enthusiastic and very able volunteers, but we are just wondering about the retention of those students as they progress through the courses. Are they going to be staying with Transition Bath as their course progresses and gets perhaps a bit more workload? And indeed, at the end of their course, are they going to stay in Bath to continue to volunteer with us? So we're a little bit worried about attrition rates there, but we just have to wait and see. Another really good job site is Charity Jobs. Now, again, that's a national platform for recruiting volunteers, and we got 7 people who were really keen to volunteer with Transition Bath. But a mistake, I made a very big mistake here, a lesson learned, is that I really needed to be very much more specific, that it's very Bath centric, because we want people who know about Bath, what its needs are, how it operates. You really need to either live or work in Bath to be a Transition Bath volunteer. So although we had applications from people all over the country, we didn't actually end up recruiting any of them. And the 4th platform that we used was called Simply Connect. That's a volunteering platform that our council, Baines, uses to advertise its volunteering roles. And we got 2 volunteers from that platform. Then on our own website, we put all of the roles out and used our newsletter to generate interest, because we have about 1,200 people signed up to our newsletter. So we just alerted them all to the fact that we were recruiting. And we put it out on our socials as well, on our social media platforms. And we got 14 people interested from that. And I think the key thing was to contact the applicants immediately, because you need to grab them while they're still keen and get them in for a really good interview. It was a very informal talk, actually, with myself and either a trustee of Transition Bath or one of the project conveners who would know all about the project that was being advertised. And the project convener would talk about the role very specifically, what the role was about, and ask the volunteer why they would want to do that role, what had attracted them to that role. And then my part was to explain to them about a little bit about Transition Bath, about how they would fit into the Transition Bath family, and what it would mean to be part of that charity. So, having recruited all of these very willing volunteers, we needed to try and retain them. So we need to do more stuff in order to maintain the momentum and keep them on board. So we organised a 2-week induction period at the beginning of October this year, starting with an online presentation from our previous chair of trustees, who just talked them through where Transition Bath had come from and where it's going, the whole transition philosophy. And then we allocated each of the projects a mentor. So all of the new volunteers had somebody, a mentor, that they could liaise with as they progressed through the project. And that mentor would then report into the trustees, so the trustees knew how the projects were progressing as well. So the volunteers weren't all left out in the cold, doing their own thing independently. It was very much a caring, sharing environment. And then a couple of weeks after the online presentation, we organised a celebration party where we all met together over some food and some drinks, and just got to know each other a bit more. The new volunteers got to meet the trustees and the project conveners and each other. So it was a really lovely, popular event, and I think people got a lot out of that meeting. One of the roles that we advertised was that of volunteer liaison, and the role that involves is reaching out to the volunteers, a couple of months down the line, to make sure that everything's going smoothly for them, make sure they haven't run into any issues, and to be a place to go if they do need any specific help or requirements that they don't know who else to contact for. So the volunteer liaison role is a new one for Transition Bath. We also set up project email and WhatsApp groups so that the new volunteers could talk amongst themselves and get to know each other that way, and as well as talk about their projects. And we hold monthly all transition meetings where everybody gets together. It's a slightly structured meeting. We talk about the projects, how they're developing, and it's another opportunity to have a chat over a drink and get to know each other a bit better. And of course, we're always putting on new events. Throughout next year, I'm currently planning a number of new events for both for the volunteers and for outreach to the general public. And everything that we do, we're shouting from the rooftops from our social media posts and in our newsletter so that everybody knows what's going on. So we're advertising widely at what we're doing as well. And this is, you probably can't read this very clearly, but it's a bubble map of where we currently are with our volunteer structure. So in the middle here, it's the trustees in orange in the centre. They're quite often doubled up as mentors. And the white bubbles are the roles that the trustees have. The green bubbles are the project-specific areas. So we've got transport, energy, food, eco-operation, and our communications, website and communications group. And all the blue bubbles are actually filled with volunteers' names. So several of the bubbles contain 6 people's names, for example. And some of the volunteers appear in multiple bubbles because they're not just role specific. They like to straddle several roles. And hopefully in February, we're going to do another recruitment campaign, which will bring many more people and projects to Transition Bath.
Thank you so much, Katie. I think sometimes it's really helpful to have that really practical step-by-step, this is what we did perspective. So really appreciate you sharing that. Our next speaker is Daniel Balla from Coexist. Danny is project lead for the Bristol Commons, an emerging community movement, building community power, striving for land justice and systemic change. Over the past 12 months, it's used a variety of techniques to grow the movement and widen its reach. And it now has over 250 people and 60 organisations involved in co-creating its next steps. It's just one of many projects Coexist has initiated to create space in which community can grow, share, collaborate, and learn what it's like to live in coexistence with each other. These include a community kitchen, the Bristol Living Soil Compost Project, and formerly transforming a vacant office block, Hamilton House, into a thriving cultural and community hub and co-working space up until 2018. I'm also particularly pleased to welcome Danny tonight, as he is about to take on the role of training and group support lead with Transition Together, and you're all the first people to find that out, to hear about that new role. So soon, hopefully, you'll all be seeing a lot more of Danny in the new year once he's settled into that role. But tonight, he's here to share a bit more about the Bristol Commons project. Danny, over to you.
Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate that introduction. So as Chris mentioned, I work for an organisation called Coexist. I'm one of the directors, and we started off in 2008 here at Hamilton House, which was an empty office block when we began. And it's important to mention this in terms of like our movement building and our community building and outreach, because this is the kind of skills that we had. It was community building person to person, in very much kind of like in place. Yeah, cool. So this is the building that we began in anyway. And you know, when you're located in place and you're meeting people kind of each day, that community building practice was really sort of embedded in kind of like what we do. So you know, we sort of learned quite a lot of things over the 10 years in one location. We built it up to sort of over 500 artists, social enterprises and charities. And at its peak, you know, it was super busy. It had over 20,000 visitors a month, contributing quite a lot locally. And then the key thing here is it was networked with thousands of other groups around the city and movements locally, nationally, internationally. So we had this sort of, you know, really blessed experience before it became co-opted. So when we lost that space, we were really asking kind of, oh, okay, so how do we actually kind of do what we need to do when we're not kind of like located in place in the same way? And how can we make sure that community projects like ours don't, you know, come a cropper to the same kind of forces? And so we looked at what we wanted to do. We wanted to build this community power. We wanted to really work on issues of land justice and systemic change. And we decided that we're going to do that through a commons lens. And so we founded this kind of network, this movement called the Bristol Commons. And it was just an idea for a long, long time. The pandemic happened before we could really kind of launch it. And then post-pandemic, it took a little while before finally, sort of last November, really, we started to kind of introduce the concept, and we just did a call out. That was the first thing that we did. And we had to explain what a commons was. So it, you know, we kind of looked at our definition and thought, this is far too difficult. We need to find a better way to communicate. So we just thought we'd come back to our networks. And how do we enliven our networks? How do we kind of like really kind of bring it to life and enable people to really kind of like see their place in what we do? So we started with these catch-up conversations. This was our first strategy. We'd meet people kind of like face to face and let people know what we were doing as Coexist and what this intention of the kind of the commons was. The Bristol Commons. And through those catch-up conversations, we became more proficient with our language and finding ways to explain what commons is and to expand people's understanding of commons, because lots of people had very kind of, I guess, views that weren't necessarily kind of aligned with what we were trying to go for. They're thinking House of Commons and things like that. So these catch-ups were really, really, really key. And we targeted kind of people who we had connections with already from our history. So we had that to draw upon, but also councillors and key people within organisations. And so we were being really, really strategic with kind of like how we were kind of planting these sort of initial seeds. we started to hold these kind of big community gatherings. That was the thing that we needed to do. This call out that I mentioned was like, come and help us kind of co-found, help us launch and co-create the Bristol Commons. And so we had over, I think, almost 200 people came to the first one back in March of this year. And in order to make sure that we were bringing lots of different people in, we had a variety of diverse offerings that people could choose from, so they could really place themselves in something that they really aligned with, whether that was something that was, you know, participatory, that they could kind of like lead themselves, like open space, for example, whether it was a creative activity that they could get involved with that was led by a practitioner. Bringing art and creativity in from the beginning was really, really important into building community and doing this outreach work, whether it was a panel discussion, something like that. Or films. We found the films that we've made really beneficial in helping clarify what it is that we're doing. And those films then kind of like reach an audience because they're shared and you know, seen in different contexts as well. So we made films to actually show at conferences and go into organizations and show them as part of something else. So it was a really, really useful medium that we used, and it was an interesting process working with filmmakers as well. We set up working groups. This is really great because this enabled people to join and have a more active role. And some of them have got quite big. We've got 3 kind of going at the moment. One looking at strategy and membership. The other one's looking at narrative building and communications. How do we tell the story of the Bristol Commons? And a third one to do with mapping and resources. How can we share our resources? How can we create this culture of reciprocity? So the working groups sort of have a life of their own, really. Yeah, we support them sort of from the centre, I suppose, as much as possible. Working in partnership was like another key strategy. So I've got 2 facilitators here from Diverse Artists Network. And, you know, we really were very clear from the get-go. We didn't want to just sort of like replicate a lot of the groups that we've been involved with in the past, where predominantly we'd have kind of like white, often middle class participants. So, you know, working with Black Southwest Network, Diverse Artist Network, groups like this have really enabled us to have a kind of much broader reach into the types of people and different groups that we're able to kind of like access. So, and they bring loads of amazing skills as well, and cultural richness, which, you know, gets embedded through. And if we are really wanting to do something which is citywide and representative of everyone, we really need to make sure everyone's there from the get-go. Connective practices are really important. We want to build connection because we find that then people are more likely to come back if they have that relationship with other people there, that they get something from it. And so offering food has been a key strategy, you know, and sharing food at every gathering we do, whether it's a small working group, whether it's a big event, and that there's no limit, there's no sort of paywall to that. So we've put a lot of our kind of like money towards subsidizing that process, making sure that it's local, organic, and all the rest of it, really in line with our transition values. Using the radio and other kind of like local platforms has been a real kind of key thing, and really interesting as well. It certainly like gets the story out there. GIFs and things like that to kind of share on social media, kind of, they've been really interesting kind of things to be working with artists on those as well. And social media platforms we kind of like used in 2 distinct ways, which I'll come on to in a second. So yeah, just to sort of like recap the sort of general strategy for this kind of movement building, really. And I think it's also interesting that we think about it as a movement, because, you know, we're traveling, we've got a direction that we're kind of going in, and we want to build this kind of sense of participation that is broader than just membership, you know, of a particular group. You know, you can kind of come in, you can come out. That feels really, really important to us as well. So we've had these catch-ups. We had Common Sense, which is going around to local communities and their common spaces. So really kind of like spreading ourselves up around the geography. That citywide call out I spoke about, and community gatherings, the big community gatherings. Making it accessible, creative, participatory, and diverse, you know, real key principles to what we've been doing. Running those working groups, And partnership events like this one, I suppose, although now I'm working for Transition Together, obviously, there's a bridge there too. But, you know, going onto other people's platforms to talk and to participate in what they're doing too has been really important. I've covered social media a little bit as well, but just to say we're present on Facebook and Instagram, but really, when it comes to our platforms, we've got two things. We're trying to build internally on independent open source kind of platforms, like Telegram, and using the Vive platform, for which Transition Together have launched. And then externally, we go with, well, what's most used by everybody? What's super accessible? So of course, we communicate through Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram and stuff like that too. But we're trying to build the internal structure, on data that we can actually control. And for the future, we really hope to have like street teams of volunteers that can go out and talk to people in the street. And we're building a manifesto that we're going to get printed and published, and having material that people can work with is going to be a really, really important thing for us. So just to kind of finish off, to kind of explain where we've got to in terms of our movement building, we're 13 months in effectively, really, although we had that head start of a kind of an existing community at Hamilton House. And we've managed to make over 530 connections. And what that means is real conversations with real people, and the people that have come to our events. 250 active community members, over 60 organisations involved across the Bristol Commons so far, and nested in within these other networks as well, like Transition, for example, and like the climate movement and other networks that we exist within. And these three working groups are very active and bringing people in all the time, giving them people opportunity to participate. And that's it, really. That's where we've got to. And our strategy for how we got there.
Thank you so much, Danny. Wow, that's so impressive in 13 months, and really great to hear some of the thinking behind how you've got there and what you've been doing. Last but definitely not least, our final speaker is Chris Hopkins from Sustainable Tring, formerly Tring in Transition. Chris has been involved in the group since 2009, initially with the food group, but later getting involved in all sorts of activities with the group. Her main area of interest now is the community garden, and the group also runs a repair cafe and a thermal imaging project. And after merging with another local group recently, they host a film group, a wildlife group, and a campaign to become a plastic-free town. Tring is a town in Hertfordshire with a population of about 12,000. The group wanted to relaunch after emerging from the pandemic, and Chris has been part of that process and restructuring, which has included an outreach plan and holding town meetings to bring people and groups together. Chris, we're looking forward to hearing more. And Misha is going to share your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. I haven't got so much of a presentation, but a few photos anyway. I just wanted to go through our process that we went through over the last nearly 2 years now. As Chris said, we're a market town in Tring. We're a very connected town. People know one another. We've got lots of groups and organisations in the town, and you'll come across the same people in the different organisations. So we are a connected town, and it's a town where people, if they think they want to do something, they kind of get on and do it. We're in a bit of a transition hotspot. We've got Berkhamsted, Transition Town Berkhamsted just down the road. And then beyond that, Kings Langley have a group called the Grand Union Community Energy. And I think they're just about to relaunch their transition initiative as well. So there's quite a bit of transition going on, and we've always worked well with the other groups. In spring 2022, our numbers had really gone down in terms of the steering group. People had moved away from the area and so on. And but we had two good projects. We had the repair cafe, which somebody has spoken about, and they're just fantastic. It's been a huge success. And the community garden. and they had their own teams of volunteers, and they were working quite well independently of one another. So we came to hold our AGM, and we really weren't expecting many people to turn up, but we had 17 people turn up, which was amazing. We just thought it was going to be 4 people sitting at the pub. And they were people with enthusiasm, with good ideas, and we had a great evening of discussion at the AGM. Over the course of the summer, a Sustainable Tring thing started emerging to be a kind of umbrella organisation for all the different groups, and Tring in Transition was to be a key part of that organisation. So together we held a People's Assembly type of format, and the first meeting, that was in September, we invited people from all organisations, Farmers Market, the Town Council, the Borough Council, the Local History, XR, Allotments Association, just about everybody at the churches. We've got people who are on Facebook posting about green issues. We invited them. And then the sort of national organisations like the Wildlife Trust and the Woodland Trust, and just tried to get them all together. And we asked 2 questions. What does Sustainable Tring mean to you? And what happens next? And that was a well-attended evening. We had about 40 people there. And from that, we picked out some priorities as to what we might do. So then the next meeting, we threw it open to the whole town in October the 27th. And we formed some action groups from there. So it was a bit like the original unleashing that we'd held all those years ago. So we started working on this, and with the action groups, we made new links with old friends, etc. But after a little while, we felt that we were starting to, there was a bit of a duplication of effort. So we decided, a bit of discussion about this, but we decided to kind of join the new organisation up with Tring in Transition, and really utilise that umbrella strategy. Still a transition town, of course. We decided to call the joint organisation Sustainable Tring, and we had actually been thinking about calling it Sustainable Tring. Oh, excuse me. We had been thinking about changing our name to Sustainable Tring for some while. So we started sorting out all the details of this, and at our AGM this spring, we joined forces, put it to the vote, and we joined forces. So we've had a busy year one way or another in Tring. We've been asked to consult on a number of different things. A new community hall, planning applications for an extra 1,400 homes, and a new local plan as well. And we've been putting a lot of effort into responding to all of that. So we now have lots of groups. Some we were doing already, some are completely new, and some we've gathered in from outside, as it were. So the Plastic Free Tring was a group that was already running, but they're now under our umbrella. It means that each of those groups has access to the public liability insurance. There's access to a bank account, extra pairs of hands maybe to help at a time. So we've got to kind of, the original transition setup was with groups, but this is kind of a looser grouping, if you like. So we hold a what we call a hive, where every leader can come along to the meeting, plus the people on the next slide, which is sort of affiliated groups and events. All of the team leaders can post to our Facebook page, and they can have any space they want on our website, so that they all have a presence all of the time, even if they're maybe not doing anything much at any particular moment. So it seems a good structure at the moment. It means that we can gather people in if they want to do something. If they've got a little project they want to run, it may even be for a little while, we've got the infrastructure to help promote it and provide them with a bit of extra support if required. So from this year, we've been able to collaborate in the Great Big Green Week. We've had terrific support from the local council. We're a sort of a two-tier council, so we're just a town council. Our main council is Dacorum Borough in Hemel Hempstead. We're getting great support from them. They did a lot of work towards the Great Big Green Week. And then we're also fortunate in Tring that we have another organisation where I guess a lot of transition towns would be running events, but they're called Tring Together, and they, for example, run the Apple Fair. So we take part in it, but we don't have to actually organise it. Other things that we now have a regular litter picking group. The town council has an email newsletter and it advertises all our events as well. We've been able to run film nights and so obviously quite a bit of work involved in changing name, if anybody's ever tried to do that. But we applied for a seed funding grant towards the end of last year, and we've been able to help rebrand ourselves and all of the expenses that are involved in that. So far so good. It's sort of fairly early days for it feels like quite a new structure, but it seems to be working okay. So when our numbers were dwindling so much, I suppose the obvious thing to do would be to have a relaunch, but I don't know that we'd have thought of doing that. But so we were lucky that this other group of enthusiastic people came along and gave us a much needed boost, and it's working well so far. Okay, that's me. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I love how you've been so flexible in thinking about your structure and your boundaries, you know, to actually be able to facilitate this kind of work and change to happen in the best way it can. So 4 really different stories there from 4 different contexts. I'm sure that's a lot of food for thought for people. I wonder, have we any questions? People still thinking? If not, I'll maybe kick off while you're just composing your questions in your head. I'd like to ask any of the speakers if you've got any comment on the donut effect, this thing that can happen in transition groups and other sorts of projects as well. There's lots of energy and activity in some of the projects and the actual practical work, rolling up the sleeves, getting stuff done. But you need a certain amount of capacity in the centre to be able to keep it holding it all together. And I think each of you have talked about the variety of things you have going on in your community, and how that's wonderful because it gives people many different places to plug in, many different things to be interested in and to get involved with. But how do you keep it all together? Pippa, would you fancy a go at that question? Oh, you're on mute.
I think that's a really interesting question, because events bring people in who might, who love to come. They love to come and do something practical, but they don't necessarily have the time or the headspace or the skills, perhaps, to do the social media and send the mailings out and organise the meetings. And that ends up being a very small group of people. I'm really interested in the idea of having some paid help to help with that, because sometimes people would love to help, but financially it's just not possible to do a huge amount of work for nothing. I think that we probably all need to think about our administration and our structure in that way. And I had been wondering whether Transition Network or Transition Together might in some ways be able to help us with some of that. Because, for example, when we wanted to become a charity, I asked Transition Together whether anybody had any experience, and then they were very helpful. They said, "Oh, don't know, but we'll send that out to other people." And actually, it was another transition group, a very nice person from Transition Telford, who sent me their constitution, that enabled me to see how you get something as complex as a transition group into being a charity. But I feel as if we are all banging on the same drum. We've all got the same problems getting bank accounts. We've all got the same problems doing all that kind of practical stuff. And it would be wonderful to have some kind of top tips or something like that about how you do it, because otherwise I'm sure we're all making the same mistakes.
That's great. I'm sure our friend Danny is making frantic notes there for his new role. Danny, do you have any comments on that? You mentioned you have 3 working groups at Bristol Commons and hundreds of people involved. Do you manage to have enough capacity in the core to keep it all hanging together?
Just about is the answer. Yeah, it's a really interesting effect, isn't it? And it's very common. I really love the idea of being kind of an umbrella, if you like, so that lots of different groups can have access to a bank account and provide some of the kind of core services. That's really, really clever, and I've seen that happen elsewhere too. So that I thought was a really lovely little kind of like input. Ourselves, I think the main thing is we're really trying to kind of create the structures at the moment. So it is quite amorphous at present. It's only 13 months old, really. And we didn't start it with a governance structure because we believed that it needed to be co-created. So Coexist as an organization is in this sort of strange role of holding the centre at the moment with the funding that we have, and sort of seeding this movement and holding the space for it to form its own governance, and taking ourselves out of the equation. Well, not out of the equation, but just kind of, from holding it all to being, one organization amongst many. So it's quite a strange position to be in, really. But the one thing that I would say is that if you've got people in the team that are really good at organizing, they are golden. And so how do you want to really keep them sweet and keep them really kind of nurtured, and I think that that applies to everybody. Really make sure that that we're really doing the things to make it feel good. That's one of the biggest things that you can do, because alongside all the things we want to achieve, the biggest thing that we can do is kind of build that kind of sense of solidarity that we're in it together.
That's great. Chris or Katie, do you have anything to add on that question before we move on? We have a couple more hands up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have acquired some new roles through the recruitment of these new volunteers, one of which is the volunteer liaison. And I think that's a really key role, to know what's going on in the volunteer, with the volunteers, not just in the projects, because that's kind of self-explanatory, but actually how are the volunteers feeling themselves about being involved. And that's in, well, we're yet to see if it works, but I think that's key to retaining volunteers, to make them feel that they actually belong and they're just not a cog in a wheel, but they mean something.
Thanks, Katie. Chris, you wanted to jump in as well?
I was just going to say, yes, that's where we were as a sort of a donut, really. And I think at the moment we still need to think about forming a strategy group, especially if we're going to be partnership working with Berkhamsted and Kings Langley. We need to keep abreast of what's going on. There seems to be an awful lot going on at the moment. So, yeah, well, I think we'll need to try and establish a few people who will kind of just keep an eye on things and liaise and make decisions a little bit. And then the team leaders can be working out their own teams, as it were. But I think overall there needs to be something overseeing it somehow. I'm not quite sure, but I'm interested to hear from Danny that you perhaps wait to see how it all emerges. That's always a strong theme, isn't it, with transition, let it go where it wants to. So, yeah, we'll give that some thought.
Thanks, Chris. Certainly from my own experience of other community organisations here in Belfast, I set up and have been involved in Repair Cafe Belfast for 6 years, and we have 60 or 70 volunteers, but we've recently kind of evolved. I'm a great believer that your structures have to serve what you want to do and the people who are involved, and not to start with the structure on paper. So we recently created like a little events team to do some of the operational planning for events, because our board was really struggling to do that day-to-day stuff and also have a bit of a strategy and plan. And that trust to let other people take on things is really important, and to be willing to share the role and share the information and share the power. And also to ask, because it turns out that lots of our volunteers who were coming to events and really enjoying being at events loved it and wanted to do more, but hadn't been invited. And actually were willing to take on some admin and take on some data entry and take on some communication, social media stuff when we created the invitation. So Jess has a question, and we've also got a couple of questions from Kathy in the chat. So Jess, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a bit distracted here and a bit poorly, so I might not make much sense. Yeah, so I'm definitely identifying with the donut situation. Technically, so I'm based in Stroud, and technically there's like, it's an absolute hive of activity, but I wouldn't say Transition Stroud's always at the centre of it. And so it's more a question for Chris at Tring, actually. Not that we're suggesting we're going to do this, but I was wondering what triggered the decision to rebrand, because we have so many different community activists and really powerful groups in the area, some of which used to be part of Transition, and then some of which evolved completely independently, but we have spent a year now rebuilding or building really strong connections with them, and we will be co-running an event a big one next year. And I just wondered what precipitated the rebrand, like what actually made you think this is the way forward, because I feel like we're losing the narrative a little bit here, personally.
Well, I suppose really the trigger was the other group forming, but there'd been pressure from various people to say we ought to rename ourselves from Tring in Transition, because everybody was finding the word transition a bit difficult to explain to people, I think. Also, we have an organisation called Tring Together, and I think the two T's, there was a certain amount of confusion. So we had a sort of half change. So we were still Tring in Transition, but our website came up with Sustainable Tring when you went on it. And I suppose because this other group trying to form some sort of umbrella getting everybody together was called the Sustainable Tring thing. When we sort of said, well, let's all just do this together, it seemed the right thing to just then call ourselves Sustainable Tring. But it is a lot of work, changing your name on Facebook and emails and all the rest of it. But I'm glad we bit the bullet and did it, because it just does feel a bit easier to explain to people what it's about. Yeah.
Thanks. It's useful. Like I said, I'm not sure we do the same thing, but it was
No,
very
so
similar.
it was, I think, because people kept saying to me, "You're part of Tring Together, aren't you?" No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that, I think that was part of it.
Thanks.
There's always a lot of local considerations
yeah.
and context, isn't there?
Yeah.
With my comms hat on, within Transition Together, I'm really interested early next year in thinking more about how we can communicate what transition is. And obviously it's in the top of the news today, isn't it? In terms of the transition away from fossil fuels being talked about at COP. And I'm really interested in how we can actually bring that back to the narrative and be clearer, but also collectively about what transition means and why it is offering something that people and communities might want to explore and to reclaim. But a great question. Kathy, you had a couple of questions.
Yes, and they were really for Chris again in Tring, because I think that's the group that's most similar to ourselves in Chesterfield. It's quite a specific question, really, but thinking about you said that one of the activities you did was respond to planning applications. And I'm just wondering, given that you've described your Sustainable Tring as quite an umbrella group now, so it's covering quite a lot of areas. How do you respond to planning applications as a group, you know, in the spirit of doing things sort of with people rather than for people? So have you just got one person that is the expert and does all your letters, or do you roll out consultation for any planning issues and then come together and discuss them? I mean, have you got a process or a system group, you know? How does it work?
Yeah, so back in 2021, they wanted to build an extra 2,700 houses in Tring, so it would have more than doubled. So it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard to find people willing to sort of disagree with that. Subsequently, it's sort of a bit complicated, but they've changed their minds now, and they only want to build 500 houses in Tring. So that we're happy about that. But we're surrounded by Herts Rural Estate farms, and we've also had a consultation on that. And we're very lucky that we've got somebody on board who's really interested in all of this and is willing to engage with it, and also one of the farmers and one of the smallholders. So we do have people we can call on to do that. And then it means, because so we've got this one expert, and actually she's our chair at the moment. So she's put together a leaflet, but we've now got many more groups attached, and so everybody can put in their own response to the planning situation.
Do you write a letter as a group, as the umbrella group?
So we do
encourage individuals to.
Yes, we do both. Yes, right. We sent out a lot of leaflets round houses to get people to engage, and also, you know, because we've got a sort of further reach now, we can encourage people. So we all replied ourselves to the local plan, and also we were able to reach out to the community a bit more. We've got lots of people who do a lot of Facebook posting on various things. We've got a Green Tring group, and that's got well over 1,000 followers. So everything goes out to there. Yeah. So yeah, we reach people, social media and so on as well. Yeah.
And Kathy had another question just about how you get folks to come to your hive meetings. I love that term, hive meetings. That's really
well. We've only had actually 3 so far, but there were 9 at the last one, and 5 apologies. So we might have to start booking a room. I'm not sure. They've been at my house, so. But I think people will turn up as and when the situation needs them to. But you know, we keep in touch anyway, emailing and so on. But yeah, it's been okay so far.
So
great.
You said, I think you said you invite groups to send a representative, and that was just the way you worded it.
Oh, sorry. Yes, no,
no,
they
that's good, because we're having trouble with trying to get our projects to come and talk to us sometimes, so we don't know whether to require them, as part of their involvement to come along and part of a Hive meeting, so to speak, or whether we should just allow them to come if they feel they need to.
Yes, yeah. I'm interested as to whether to make them a bit more of a social rather than just a quick meeting. Would probably be a good idea. Yeah. If numbers start getting too high.
I just want to make sure we've time for Nick's question, a very topical one for many transition groups. Nick, do you want to go ahead and mute? And Danny is hoping to jump in on this one. So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And to be fair, I thought about this partly because of Danny's slide showing the Hamilton House, and it's a question that's arisen to me because a few years back I came across this thing about participatory city and what had been going on in Barking, and the way that they tried to encourage the whole community to engage in volunteering for, within that community space, sort of with the council being involved as well. But since that time, there's been this growth of zero carbon hubs and climate emergency centres. So really the question was, do you think that having a permanent physical presence on your high street or somewhere else in the community is an important factor in increasing engagement amongst the local community?
Danny, what do you think?
Thanks. I was itching to answer this one. So I think a lot about this, actually. But I think the key thing is the idea of around permanence, because one thing that can happen and does happen very often is that a group will occupy a meanwhile space, and often these kind of climate emergency centres are kind of like, meanwhile leases of a year or so at a time. And a lot of energy can go into that space. And then when they move on, that energy, a lot of it is lost because it often goes into the materiality of the building itself. And when you are kind of formed around a particular place, if you then move locations, the kind of geographical networks that emerge because someone's passing that place, or they can drop somebody off on the way, and these kinds of sort of spontaneous meetings, because of where it is, are then disrupted. So you lose all of that when it comes to moving. I'd also say that when you have a place, you then have to animate it. And it's like, how good are you at hosting and kind of, really kind of making it a space where people want to be, that's friendly and welcoming and engaging and, staffed and all of that stuff. But if you have the resources, I think community hubs and climate emergency centres and spaces can be incredible because they offer so much. And they really kind of enable people to kind of gather and run events and, feel like they have a place, a third space other than their home or their work. And so I think they're really, really fantastic things, but you do need to animate it well. And we in the past have offered lots of organisation support in doing that. So I would say yes, but, or yes, and.
I would love you to give us a little wave if the question of a community hub is interesting to your transition group or something you think it would be worth exploring in a future Skillshare. Give us a little wave if you'd be interested in that. Okay, that's quite a lot of waves. That's interesting. And I'm sure we could talk all night about that, but we are coming close to the end of this session. Just before we move towards closing, I just want to invite each of our speakers to offer maybe a final reflection if there's something that's come up for them tonight, or some last word they would like to leave us with, maybe just about a minute each. And we'll just go in the order that you originally spoke. So, Pippa.
I think that we all have the same issues, really. We're all trying to do the same kind of stuff in different ways. And I think that it's really helpful to share those ideas, because sometimes you're so busy doing all the things that need doing that you don't really think about the way that you're doing them. And so today has been really helpful for me because it's made me think about things that have been kind of at the back of my mind, and I think I'll go back to my colleagues and talk to them about it and see what we need to change. So it's been really helpful, but I do think that the same issues are pertinent to everybody.
Thank you so much, Pippa. Casey.
Yes, it's been really interesting for me to see what everybody else has been up to. Very similar things to what we at Transition Bath have done, but also some great ideas for how we could involve the community in the future, which I'm very grateful for as well. And, it'd be great if I could reach out to the other speakers to find out exactly how they went around creating those events and the results that they achieved from them. It seems to me as though Transition Bath is still very small, still developing itself, and we don't have such a diverse community, although we do have some more deprived areas. Bath is quite a wealthy city. But we would like to try and be a lot more inclusive. So I'd really love to learn from the other speakers and anybody else who has experience in, much more inclusive events. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Great, Kitty. Thank you for that. Danny.
Yeah, thanks. I think it often comes back down to the power of storytelling. And what story are we telling, and why are we telling it, and who are we telling it to, and how authentic is that story? Because if people kind of encounter what you're doing and it's different to what you've been saying, then then there's a disjunct there, and it manifests in a number of ways, and obviously increasingly it's about how you tell that story online, and I think in terms of what you're offering, it can be packaged in different ways. And I've often find like events like this and this evening it's interesting that it's my assumption that the majority of people here identify as female, and often it's difficult to get men to come to these spaces. I know that it's great to feel some solidarity with you here, Nick, but it really is an issue. And so we have identified that we need to find a way to tell that story, to make what we're doing sound attractive to to other men, I guess, and similarly other groups as well. So really thinking about what story and how we tell it.
Thank you, Danny. And Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I think it's been a really interesting evening. Obviously, our town and our group are a lot smaller than everybody else's. But I really feel that we're in a much changed situation from when we first started in 2009, and I think greater engagement from our town councils and so on. I think we're going to see quite a big change coming. I think COVID, with more people working from home, we talk about people being time constrained, but it does give them a little bit more flexibility in their time to do things and help out in transition. So it's been interesting, and I think I'm optimistic for transition groups in general. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to say a huge thank you to our speakers this evening. I've certainly learned a lot and got lots of ideas.